Hey folks, thought we'd try something different today and do a bike check and review of my 2020 Norco Sight. I've had this bike for just over a year now, so it's probably not a bad time to just take a look at the spec and talk about how it's been riding. For cranks, I run 165mm XT cranks, 30 tooth chainring. It's pretty small. I think the stock is 34 that comes on this bike. I gear down for a couple reasons. One, I run with 165mm cranks. You just don't get the same leverage, so I find I need to gear down usually about 2 teeth. Two, I'm just weak and out of shape, so 30 tooth is just what feels more comfortable for me when I'm climbing. I use 165 cranks because a couple of reasons. One is I have a hip issue, so I don't have quite as much range of motion as most people. So this gives me a little bit more room to maneuver. Not much, but every little bit helps. And 165 cranks I also like with lower bottom brackets. You're riding the shore. There's lots of rocks, logs, that kind of stuff to get over. So if you're pedaling in inappropriate places, it just gives you that little tiny smidge more pedal clearance. I'm also running a 1UP Bash guide. I've been running this thing for a couple seasons now, and it's worked out really well. I like it because it has, flip the bike over here. So the 1UP Bash guide has interchangeable plates, so you can actually change the plate depending on the size of chainring you have, and you can have a little bit more clearance than you otherwise would have with some of the other ones. This is actually probably a little bit bigger one than I need. I think there's a smaller one, but then it kind of becomes a trade-off because this larger size protector piece, I'm less likely to hit my chain and chain ring, but it's also just more likely to impact in general because it extends, almost a centimeter above some portions of the chain ring there. So it's sort of a trade-off in terms of, whether you have more protection and more strikes on the Bash, or whether you have less protection, but then you're just more likely to hit your chain or chain ring should something happen. I know some people don't run Bash rings on the shore. I don't really understand because, frankly, I use it all the time. I know I kind of ride different stuff, but yeah, for how much it weighs, the simplicity, I just use it. Why not? In terms of pedals, these are DMR Vaults. You can't really read it too much now. Most of it's worn off, but I used to run DMR V12 magnesium pedals for a couple seasons. I couldn't get them when I was putting this bike together, so I ended up with these DMR Vaults. These are the magnesium version as well. They are quite a large platform pedal. So I've actually, one of the downsides of these pedals is you'll find you get more rock strikes compared to a smaller, thinner profile pedal, just because they are quite large, and as the wheelbases get longer, bottom brackets get lower, you're just more likely to get pedal strikes. But these pedals are incredibly grippy. They are significantly better than the V12s that I was running before in terms of grip. Probably do a combination of the size of the platform, number of pins, the type of pins, and also they just have a really nice concave shape to them. So they're unbelievable, and they work incredibly well given that my shoes are about 2 years old now, and there's not a heck of a lot of grip left to them, but I don't even notice it because the pedals just have so much extra grip. So probably can't give it much better recommendation than that. One little modification that I've made to this frame in terms of the chainstay protection here. This actually, the chainstay protector itself ends right here. What I've done is I've used a product called Sugru. It's like a little moldable silicone glue, and it just comes in these small little packets. The piece is probably no bigger than your thumb, but you can take that and you can shape it around whatever surface you're working on, and it hardens to be just like a nice little silicone coating on there. So what I did is it comes in different colors. I used black, and I actually just extended the top of the chainstay protector here, because one of the downsides, as I mentioned, I run a 30 tooth chainring. I think it's 34 is the stock, so a little bit smaller diameter, and I feel like I'm more likely to get chain strikes right here along this top section of the chainstay. And it's really difficult to try and get any other material along because it's quite a thin shape, and there's just not a lot of spots to put too much on there, because if it's too thick, then you're going to run into clearance issues with the chainring. So this stuff worked really well. I just ran it right along the top. You can see the cable inserts into the frame there, so I was able to work around that. And just a slim piece comes right along the top, so it protects the paint, and then just gives me a little bit of damping. It's quite firm, so it doesn't absorb too much of the sound, but it does help in that regard as well. I've also done that back here. I only had yellow left over, and the yellows didn't match, but you know, no one really looks there, so it's doing its job. I don't really care what it looks like. So next, looking at the wheel set, this is actually 2 years old now. It's from my range. When I put that bike together, I splurged and went for the expensive wheel set. So this has DT240 hubs, and it has E13 TRS carbon rims. And I know there's lots of, people have pretty polarized opinions on carbon rims. My thought process at the time was that, like, I only weigh like 150 pounds. I'm not that hard on bikes. I don't do like really, really crazy stuff. So I think I've only bent, not quite fully tacoed, but significantly bent one rim. But every single rim that I've had since I've started mountain biking in the past couple of years just gets dents. And it was driving me nuts. I didn't used to use tubeless. I remember the first time I switched over to tubeless was, I think, probably 2017. And, mid-season, you need to change out that rear tire. It starts to get worn. And I spent hours trying to get that tire mounted on the dented, beat-up rim, and it just would not hold air. And so every season, that's typically the case anyway. So I figured, you know what, if a carbon rim is better in terms of impact protection and not getting a lot of dents, a lot of flat spots, then, maybe it's worth a try. So I did it, and 2 years later, and I have not touched these wheels. I have not true to spoke, haven't had to retension anything. They've just been awesome. And the rear has been especially good. If you listen to my videos closely, you'll probably notice that I get quite a few rim strikes. In terms of pressure, I run about 21 PSI in the rear typically. I do not use Cushcore or any type of foam, any type of rim protection like that. Just the Minion DHR2 XO or XO Plus casing, depending on what's available. And yeah, despite honestly a countless number of hard rim strikes that surely would have dented an aluminum rim, this thing is still kicking, and no cracks, no problems. So carbon rims get my seal of approval from this point. In terms of the hubs, you can't really see that says DT Swiss. You can just make it out a little bit there. It's pretty dirty, but I bought these hubs because they have a reputation as being really the most reliable and lightweight hubs in their class, I feel like. So that was kind of the rationale behind that, and they've lived up to their expectations in that regard. My only issues with the rear hub is just the engagement. So this comes with the, I think it's 54 tooth engagement ratchet. I know you can get a few different ones, but as a trials rider who's come from like near instant engagement, this is not great. And to be honest, it's not a huge deal in mountain biking. I've survived on it for a couple of years. So yeah, it's not the end of the world, but if I could improve on one thing on my next bike, it'll be a hub with better engagement. Because yeah, they're light, they're reliable, but I just want a little bit quicker engagement than what that offers. So in terms of tires, I already talked about the rear tire. Front, Minion DHR 2.5 XO Plus. All these funky little symbols here along the side. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the Minions have just been, they've just been good. I typically go through about two rear tires a season and one front tire. That's all you need when you only ride like 1.25 times a week, I think my average is. What else we got here? Trans-X, I think this is 170 or 175 millimeter dropper post. Just comes standard on the site build. This was the C2 build originally, and then I've customized, a fair, probably about 75% of the bike now, but this is one of the original pieces that came with it. I did switch out the lever. This is a 1-up lever. The post has been flawless. It does everything you'd expect it to. Yeah, I haven't touched it, and that's really the best thing you can say about it, is after a year, it still functions just as good as new. The lever ergonomics and just usability was not great, so I switched to the 1UP. Yeah, it's perfect. This is the aluminum model, and yeah, I couldn't ask for anything more. Matchmaker integration. Actually, you know what? I did have one tiny complaint. When I first got this, I'm not sure if you can tell on the light here, but this is like a little ribbed or serrated edge here, just so you get some grip on your thumb. One of the bottom pieces had a little bit of a burr, so I just took some sandpaper and smoothed that out. But that is a high impact area if you're going to go over the bars, so just make sure you keep an eye on that. If it was a little bit smoother along the bottom and just had the ridges a little bit higher up, I think from a safety standpoint that would make more sense. Otherwise, yeah, it works really well. As a 170 dropper, I think, you know, last year on the range I had a 180 1UP. If I wasn't so lazy, I would have put one on this bike. This one works well enough, but given the choice, I probably would opt for the 1UP, just because you can get a little bit more drop for the same overall insertion length. And I might even try next year to go for a full 210 dropper post, but we'll see. We'll see if I can fit it. Next up, we'll talk about suspension. So Fox Float X2. I made a little minor tweak when I got this bike. Fox makes custom decal kits in a variety of colors, so I got the yellow. You can see this actually matches quite well, and if you've ever tried to match decals from or colors from different companies, you realize how difficult that is. So this works out pretty well. I also did it over here on the fork, which I really think just ties the colors in nicely. Before, I think this was just the standard like black and gray, so to have a bit of yellow on the shock and on the fork just really ties it in. In a perfect world, this would be a yellow lower and it would look super awesome, but Fox doesn't make that, so this is the best I could do. In terms of shock setup, I use the Norco Ride Align app to get started. You can put in the type of bike you have, weight, height, just your riding characteristics, and it'll give you a base starting tune and with some suggestions on how to optimize that if you find it's a little bit too soft or too stiff. I started with that, worked out really well for me. The only thing that I've changed is I opened up rebound a little bit and compression. I think one click less damping on both those settings. As a trials rider who was on a fully rigid bike for like 17 years, suspension is kind of a bit of a mystery, so it's nice to have the app to get you started. Most people like more damping than I do. I like my bike to be very just quick and springy feeling. I know that's not great from a mountain bike perspective, because the whole idea behind suspension is to keep your wheels glued to the ground. But it just, I don't know, I just like my bikes to be really poppy and playful, and that means less damping. So yeah, that's what I did on that. I'll put the actual numbers up on the screen because off the top of my head, I can't remember. I want to say it's about 220 PSI that I ended up with for my 150 pound body. And again, pretty close on the compression and damping settings, compression and rebound settings, but I backed off just a little bit. For the fork, pretty similar story. Again, I cannot remember what pressure I ended up running. The one thing I had difficulty with, the Ride Align app suggests only one token. I like to run more tokens because it just gives me a little bit more bottom out resistance for some of the, like a big drop or something like that. So I've been running 2. I did try 3 tokens in there, but it was a little bit too harsh. So I found that 2 worked out well for me. My rebound is faster than the recommended setting, and I have no compression damping whatsoever. Again, I like my suspension just to be free, really bouncy. Yeah, that's just the way I like it. So works for me. One other thing to point out on the fork, I always used to run just like the little low profile front fenders, and then this year I picked up one of these mud huggers. Now it's pretty big, and everyone's aesthetic choice is a little bit different. I'm not wild about how it looks, but honestly it works so much better than the tiny little flexible plastic ones that most people run. So living here on the shore where it's wet good amount of the time, this fender works really well. Especially, you know, I'm always trying to get POV footage, and when your camera's covered in mud, it doesn't really work out too well. Next, let's talk about brakes. I run Code RSCs. I used to run the guides before this, and I just found they were really underpowered. They just didn't really make the cut for like a long, steep descent. Codes have made a big improvement on that. They still have all the same modulation that the guides did, but with much more usable power. I know lots of people like to kind of compare Shimano and SRAM. I love Shimano lever ergonomics. They are by far the best in that regard for my hands. But in terms of the overall brake feel, I really liked the Codes. They just have much more modulation. The Shimano on-off feel, you get used to it and you learn how to modulate just based on your, how you're using and applying the brake. But yeah, I really like the Codes from that perspective. For bar and stem setup, this is just the stock Norco 40mm stem. It's a piece of aluminum. It does what you would expect a stem to do. For the bar, 1UP Carbon. This is the high rise 35mm rise version. I like my front end to be really high. You can also see, because I got 3 large spacers, plus this headset top cup is very, very tall. So a whole whack of spacers. I just really like my front end to ride quite high. So yeah, I mean, I could, I guess, technically put more, but it just seems embarrassing to have any more spacers. So we'll leave it at that. I use Deity Knuckle Duster grips. These grips are a little bit larger profile than I would otherwise ride, but I broke my thumb, I'm going to say 2 years ago now, and it was difficult to get back into riding just due to the pain. And I tried a few different grip types and settled on these. Again, tiny bit thicker than I would normally like, but they are just really, really comfortable, and I've stuck with them for 2 years now. Yellow, remember I talked about matching before, so I threw the yellow grips on it. These are really dirty, so the yellow doesn't really match that well, but it's not bad, you know. You win some, you lose some. It's better than nothing. So now that we covered spec, we can go on to how the bike rides. So last year I was on a 2019 Norco Range, also 27.5 wheels, also a size medium. Really the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about the difference between the bikes is geometry. So this bike has a slacker head angle, so it's 63.5, whereas my range was 65 with a 170mm fork that I had on there. That slack head angle paired with a much longer front center has put the wheelbase to be quite a bit longer than the range, relatively speaking. I think it's about 4 centimeters or so. Chainstays are also a bit longer, only a little bit, about 5mm, and then the kinematics are different as well. Despite the bike being longer on paper, it doesn't actually feel that much longer. You know, I could bunny hop pretty much the same on this bike compared to the range. The only thing that really jumped out at me when I first got on it was not so much pulling up the front end, it was weighting the front end to do like a nose wheelie or a pivot. If you watch my videos, I'm a former trials rider, and I probably do, you know, at least 5 or 6 nose pivots per trail that I ride on, just because that's been my riding style for so long that it's hard to change. But one of the moves I used to do when I got a new bike, just to test out the suspension, sort of a funny way, was I do this old trials move that I used to do if I was doing a show, where you go up onto the front wheel and you start hopping around on your front tire in a 360. And so I would do that on my range periodically. And when I got the sight, I was like, okay, first thing I'll do, you know, set the suspension up and give it a go. And so I remember, you know, you pedal once or twice just to get some momentum, hit the front brake, and then you come up onto the front wheel and you start hopping and you gradually start to turn. Well, on the sight, as soon as I tried to hit the front brake and get weight over the front wheel, I think my rear wheel felt like it only came off the ground a few inches, just because the weight distribution is so different on this bike. On the range, where you had a shorter front end, a longer stem, and a steeper head angle, your weight was much more over the wheels as opposed to in between the wheels. The sight, on the other hand, it was just a huge difference. And I think, you know, when you immediately jump on a bike, it tells you pretty quick what the differences are, you know, before you have a chance to get used to it and you're using the same movements as you did on your old bike. And yeah, it was really difficult to get over the front end. And as a trials rider and, you know, doing weird things, it took some adjustment to get used to, but that really kind of tells you what, you know, what the geometry is trying to be on this bike, which is more stable. So if you're riding a steep trail, if you're riding a fast trail, being in the bike, the way that the geometry is set up, It just makes it much more stable and gives you more control when you're riding in just more difficult situations. And while it did feel a bit odd trying to do my trialsy moves initially, which actually made me quite worried when I first got this bike. You know, the first couple rides, I definitely wondered whether I had made the right decision and picking up this site. But you know, the trails that I look to that kind of tell me whether I can ride this bike as well as I could my range would be something like Iminator and Salvation. You know, those are two trails that I've entered for the GoPro contest before, and they are old school. They're meant for 26-inch wheels and narrow bars and short bikes, and so they really challenge your new bike geometry, let's put it that way. But in terms of both those trails, I ride Iminator usually once a year just to do a little speed run, test myself. I did maybe 3 runs this year in a row, trying to just get things dialed. And after that, I was only, I think, maybe a few seconds off my 2019 GoPro contest run. So felt plenty fast on that. And my 2020 entry was on Salvation. And, you know, I actually hurt myself quite badly on that trail riding previous range, the green and orange one that I had, so I was very familiar with it. And then getting on the site, I had faster time and felt just as comfortable. And so, you know, despite that early trepidation on the first couple rides, just not being able to maneuver the bike in tight situations, once your body gets used to the new geometry, you just adapt quite quickly. And again, I've been able to manage all those tight technical elements that I would have been able to do on the range before. And in the end, there's no getting around the physics of the bike and the numbers on the bike. You know, it is longer. It has a longer wheelbase, a longer front center, and longer chainstays compared to the range. So that definitely holds you back a little bit. But, you know, the benefits that you get in terms of, I'll call it normal mountain biking, what most people do, you know, just ripping down the trail, it is definitely much better. The climbing position is so much better with the steep seat angle. Descending feels better because you're in a much more stable position inside the bike. And those tech things, they come along too. And again, most people aren't going to do anywhere close to what the kind of stuff that I like to ride. I'm sort of a bit different being a trials rider in background. So yeah, I've really enjoyed this bike over the past year. I've actually sat on this footage for so long that I have since got a new Norco sight. Same frame, another yellow one, but I've kind of built it up a little bit differently this year. So once I get all my parts dialed on that bike, I'll do another bike check and I'll show you what I wanted to change from this build, some of the things that I didn't quite like, and yeah, you'll have to wait and see. Thank you everyone for watching. If you have any questions, just let me know down in the comments. Hope you guys enjoyed. Cheers.